This video is devoted to genre definitions and problems caused by formal approach to definition as a set of criteria. It discusses the modern usage of roguelike-lite tag and the many problems it has. I will also provide some context to those who know little about the situation. The point of this video is not to enforce any one true definition, rather to provide the reasons why the currently widespread one is problematic. Please note that while disputing the genre classification of many games, I do not deny that those games are in fact amazing members of their own genres. What I am going to refer to as games called roguelike is a wide variety of games called interchangeably roguelite, roguelike-like, and in worst case just roguelike. We'll delve into definitions later. For now, all those examples you saw on the screen should be sufficient to give context about the term. Rogue became a genre-defining game in 1980s. A game that sent the player into a pseudo-graphical dungeon looked more like a hacker's tool than a game even at its release. To compare, Legend of Zelda was released the very same year. Despite that, it got quite an appreciation among those same amateur hackers, computer nerds from the time when personal computers weren't mainstream yet. What was the cause for that love? Hard to say. Perhaps the game's demands to players' intelligence. Perhaps the simple ASCII graphics turned out to fit very well to display a variety of complex tactical situations in a concise way. What can be said for sure is that it wasn't the difficulty or permanent death. I am assured of that because neither of those was unique to Rogue. Hard games were a norm, and permanent death was nothing outstanding. Those who doubt it are welcome to look up some games from the 80s. A good game inspired imitation. Games called rogue clones, or you guessed it, roguelikes, appeared. Funny how 10 years later, when Doom made FPS genre mainstream, Doom clones or Doom likes was how the other FPS were labeled. And it repeats again with Dark Souls in 2011 and Souls-like genre. It's really just a pretty obvious way to name a genre inspired by a certain game. Roguelike meant exactly that, a rogue clone, and it was crystal clear for the next 20 years. In not-so-ancient times, 2008 to be exact, a group of guys just like me, roguelike developers, had a conference in Berlin. At some point, they decided to make a summation of features typical for a roguelike, with the result being what you see on the screen. Trying to use that list as a definition would be a silly thing to do. They freely admit that missing some points does not mean that the game is not a roguelike, neither does having some points make it a roguelike. How many is some? I don't know. Neither did they, or if they did, they forgot to record it. For what it's worth, without clarification, it can be read as game may or may not be a roguelike, whether it fits any of those points or not, which makes it about as useful a definition as decide for yourself. In defense of the list, though, it was clearly not meant to be taken seriously. It was just a fun little set of tropes, like one of those funny online polls to define whether you're a squirrel or a chipmunk. Just look at it. Complexity, dungeons, resource management. If they were making such a list for first-person shooters, it would probably look like firearms, explosions, first-person camera, no health regen, no friendly NPCs. Yet just like FPS was never defined by explosions and lack of friendly NPCs, roguelike is not defined by ASCII and permanent death. It's also funny that Sid Meier's Civilization and Ilona score the same amount of high-value factors. But Ilona gets higher score in the end. Why? Because Ilona has dungeons. Someone might ask, why do you care, Spell? Why are you so hung up on this Berlin thing? Some guys in a year-long past made up a set of rules for themselves. Let them. Well, aside from the fact that a lot of people apparently consider it the best and most accurate definition, I care because the whole genre conundrum, where the word roguelike tells you as much about the game as journalists comparing to Dark Souls, this whole mess of definitions, is among other things the result of people taking Berlin interpretation seriously. Roguelikes have always been games that are not meant for everyone. Less so now than before, but still true. You can make your game look good, give it those sweet modern shaders so that it no longer terrifies non-programmers by looking like Shell Terminal. But the tropes of the genre are such that roguelikes often resemble Rogue in more than just mechanics by being as complex and, which is worse, as unfriendly. Games are made for the fans of the genre. And fans are ready to die 1,000 times and spend a lot of effort for their victory. Fans think that losing is fun. Fans are happy when victory is something to be treasured. It's not elitism from me, statistics are on my side. Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, one of the most popular modern roguelikes, has about 2% of its games end with victory. Those games don't just pretend to be difficult, they are. But being a genre not for everyone inherently makes it seem like something elite, something people would want to participate in. Most of those people though, after trying something like Adam, would quickly reconsider, playing this is too high of a price for elitism. I don't know who exactly was the first to understand that Rogue is a great hipster-flavored brand. I'd say cellar doors were the most shameless about that, but clearly not the first. When they did though, Berlin interpretation became their weapon. Especially that part about not having to fit all criteria. Of all that list, only 2 points were adhered to: procedural generation and permanent death. That's how games called roguelikes came into being. Some of the developers, like Subset Games, had enough self-respect to call their creation a roguelike-like. Some were so brazen that they put rogue in their titles. It's important to understand that it's not really a genre development. It's a simple assignment of genre tag to the games that technically conform to a very small part of Berlin interpretation. Not only it ignores other points, including significantly more important ones like being turn-based, but also the obvious fact that roguelike is a subgenre of RPG, and as such any definition it has will be about what makes it different from other RPGs, while being an RPG is a pre-assumed requirement. But even if you still think it's an evolution, when genres evolve this much, they get separated. Diablo, for example, is a genuine case of a roguelike evolving into something else, as interviews prove. But it's still not called a roguelike. It has left its roguelike home and built its own, arguably creating its very own subgenre of RPGs, just like Rogue once did. Of course, when this all happened, some people offered to use alternative terms. There is this different genre you created. Cool, just don't call it roguelike. Call it roguelite or roguelike-like or rogue whatever if you really need that hipster branded rogue in your tags. And let's just all be friends. And that's where I would end if my video was dedicated to protecting the roguelike term. I would say, guys, just don't mix up the words, okay? Please, you make roguelike fans upset. Some of you would even take my words to heart. But this video isn't just about roguelikes, and I have to keep going, because there is an elephant-sized problem. Roguelite is not a genre name. Roguelite is a buzzword, and so is roguelike if you are mixing those words up. Let us imagine that roguelikes never existed, nor did Berlin interpretation. Let us analyze the definition in a vacuum. The closest we have is games that have procedural generation and permanent death. Can this be called the definition of a genre? In time long before Berlin interpretation, before Berlin even existed at all, Plato defined man as a two-legged animal without feathers. Diogenes heard of that and brought a plucked chicken. "Here's the Platonic human," he said. Plato had to adjust his definition. And the way he fixed it? By adding flat nails. Apparently if someone brought a chicken with flattened talons, he would have to make up some additional criteria. That's the problem of definition like this. That's why humans are nowadays defined as a particular species of apes sharing a certain genome, rather than based on how many legs they have. Before defining something as a set of characteristics, one should always consider how integral those are to the concept that's being defined. In case of games, such an integral characteristic would be moment-to-moment gameplay. In an RTS, this gameplay can be described as controlling an army. In survival game, as managing characters' resource pools. In platformer as, well, jumping on platforms. In roguelike RPG, as turn-based combat on a grid while your character gets stronger over time. For permanent death to actually be an integral characteristic of a roguelite, gameplay should probably consist of dying. Permanently. Look, it's not the problem that gameplay doesn't consist of this horrible cycle of permanent deaths, which is an oxymoron if I ever saw one. Problem is, in all of those games, gameplay consists of something other than that, something that very distinctly belongs to another genre. Look at Don't Starve, is the gameplay of a survival. Look at Slay the Spire. It's a card game. Look at Ziggurat. It's a first-person shooter. Look at Spelunky. Yes, it's a platformer. And permanent death is something that can be, and often is, a literal difficulty toggle. Until you die, that permanent death has no impact on gameplay. Oh, but surely when you die it does. After all those games have permanent death, so the same thing should happen. All deaths will be permanent. But some will be more permanent than others. Because it's supposedly such an essential thing. You could even say that it's the main link to that very rogue. And it doesn't even matter that it's also a link to Super Mario. Since it's so important, we can expect at least this one feature to be present in all of those games. Or can we? There are games like FTL, where death is actually truly permanent. Your ship explodes, your crew is dead, game over. Post-game unlocks are rare, they are almost exclusively given for victories, and they don't improve your power directly, mostly providing variety. And your victory is still dependent on your skill and luck rather than unlocks. Then there is Rogue Legacy, where death is almost non-existent. Oh sure, your character dies, but your game is not at all over. It's not even a minor defeat, it's an almost necessary stage of your game. Time to buy upgrades to make your character stronger and keep going. Game doesn't even pretend that you are meant to beat it in one life. Whole balance is built around you murdering a few dozen characters until you get to the final boss. And then there is Darkest Dungeon, where your heroes die, and it can be even considered a loss. A loss compared to losing a pawn in chess. Because this hero is a unit in your army, and even if you care deeply about him, it's still nowhere near losing a game. Those three games interpret the same word permadeath in three different, absolutely incompatible ways. Which makes me ask, do Heroes of Might and Magic have permadeath? Do chess have permadeath? Because that's what Darkest Dungeon has. Does Cookie Clicker have permadeath now? Because Ascension there works literally the same as death in Rogue Legacy. You end your current game and start a new one, spending the resources you accumulated to become stronger. This kind of trickery is often referred to as equivocation fallacy, using one term for more than one definition. That is not the same mechanic between those three games. That is three different mechanics pretending to be the same thing. What can be more useless of a definition than one where a key term can switch meanings on the fly? Apparently, a definition with two such terms. Just like permanent death, procedural generation is never a factor in moment-to-moment gameplay. You can have a procedural map replaced with a static one, and you wouldn't know the difference until many playthroughs. In fact, that already happened, because Into the Breach, the second game from creators of FTL, doesn't even have procedural generation, nor is it marketed as anything rogue-related, which doesn't stop people from calling it a roguelike, while also mistaking its static maps for procedural. I have great respect for subset games for at least trying to be careful with terms, and thankful for that involuntary experiment that helps prove my point. But once again, just like permanent death, procedural generation seems to mean whatever the creators of the game want it to mean. Some games, like Don't Starve, actually generate the environment procedurally. Some, like Binding of Isaac, have a set of fixed rooms that they mix and match. Some games don't have a procedural environment because they don't have an environment, period. FTL does not have any environment, nor does Slay the Spire. They have a set of events that get dealt to you randomly. So, does it mean that Monopoly is procedurally generated? Does it mean that literally every game that uses a classic deck of cards is procedurally generated? Is Minesweeper procedurally generated? That one also has permadeath, by the way, and not just any permadeath, good old game over. Guess I found an exemplary roguelite. So, there we have it. A buzzword that not only tells you nothing about the game's core mechanics, not only isn't consistent with its own definition, but also tries to take over an actual meaningful word roguelike that covers a small RPG subgenre with its own dedicated fan base. A buzzword worthy of being thrown into garbage bin for two independent reasons that also hurts an actual useful term. It's not even about who's right and who's wrong. It's not about my feelings, your feelings, or roguelike fans' feelings. It's useless and harmful from purely utilitarian perspective. Descriptivism and language evolution do not counter the lack of utility. I know full well the reasons people keep using that tag. I still urge you not to, even if you are trying to sell your game. Because the more you do, the more useless it becomes, both for finding games and for meaningful discussion, while also messing up people's understanding of what genre even is. If you want to repeat the success of Darkest Dungeon, don't call yourself a roguelike. Hire Wayne June to be your narrator instead.